Mr. Abbas the Alchemist, welcome, welcome. I
Thank you,
gotta,
Richard.
I gotta say, your channel is by far the best channel on YouTube for theurgy I've ever seen and experienced in my entire life. And I need to get more people interested in it. And so maybe like the first thing I want to kind of like talk about is what is theurgy, or at least what is theurgy to you? Because I know there's kind of different types.
Oh, interesting. Yes, I think a really great scholar on this topic is Gregory Shaw, and I think he's created seminal works on exactly that, specifically the Iamblichian sort of reception of theurgy, um, and he would define sort of theurgique as almost this idea of God work, and so that's a very suppose, a very broad, very basic definition. If we contrast, sort of everyone seems to, rely on these two distinctions of the theologica as like, this is God talk versus God work. And of course, when we
Mm.
start to, yeah, when we start to kind of like delve into it, it starts to unfold. And I think it could very easily become very unwieldy and a lot of moving parts. And I think it could get very overwhelming for most people, including myself. I think I'm perpetually overwhelmed by the content and the material.
Yeah, no, because when I think people think of theurgy, it seems like something nebulous, but there has to be some kind of techne or technique or praxis behind it. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to see, like, because a lot of people see it's like, liblations or, burning or sacrifices to the gods. But there also seems to be this other part, or like maybe like Proclus talks about it more, where it's like there's theurgy where you're contacting gods, and there's a theurgy just for the monad or the absolute, where you connect to
Mm.
that. It's almost like some apophatic, negative theology,
Yeah, negative.
meditative
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I think the distinction that I've seen kind of played out is this idea of lower theurgy and a higher theurgy. And sort of the distinction being that, you typically start, well, ultimately it really depends on the nature of your soul, the constitution of your soul, what sort of qualities that you've been blessed with, whether it's musical or intellectual, like philosophical, for instance, or you're more materially oriented, maybe you're more sensual. In that case, you'd be using more of what they would term sort of the preliminary lower theurgy. I don't really like myself, I don't like that distinction. I think you can balance the different types of levels on this sort of like, what would you say, this chain of being or the different hypostases. But ultimately, the lower theurgy is sort of using sort of the end cosmic, well, I wouldn't want to say using, sort of participating in the end cosmic
Mm.
gods and the materials and the synthemata, the sort of the stones, the plants, the aromatics that will then allow you to kind of imitate, of course, with that principle of, like to like, this idea that you're imitating the activity of the god. And by doing so, you're functioning in a certain way as the god, like the god, while still remaining that difference, still remaining that distinction. There is no, annihilation into the godhead, if you will, which is like fanam, which is more of the Sufi notion. Sometimes when you're annihilating yourself, you're dissolving into that God principle, if you will. Um, but yeah, you'd be using those lower. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's really interesting. Because it's if it's not annihilation, then what is the path of theurgy kind of aiming towards? Like, and I kind of wanted to talk about like this connects to the immortality of the soul, or maybe the soul's level of consciousness. Is this
Mhm.
like does theurgy? What does theurgy actually do? Does it increase the power of the soul, or move us up, or like a rung of being ontologically? Like what is it supposed to do in essence? It's not surely it's not just like contact God. God gives me information, and then I'm cool.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's epididiotis is this idea of fitness. You're creating a
Mm.
receptacle. You're allowing yourself to, sometimes the term is used as kenosis, this sort of like evacuation of, you're creating a hupodoke. You're creating a receptacle for something, someone to come in, for energies of the gods to manifest. And so by participating in that, you are essentially changing the rhythm of your power, your activities, your energeia. And in that way, you're becoming like the gods in the sense that they're perfect while we are imperfect beings. And through that sort of constant reception and increasing of one's fitness, you're allowing for a space. And that space is where something can come in. And I believe the term that Iamblichus often uses is called exultin, which means coming from without. But in a sense, they're both within. The gods are both within. So there's always this tension. The gods are still within, but they're also coming from without. And in the sense of certain practices, let's say, the soul is, for example, in photogogia, right, where you're sort of drawing the light, leading the light. What's happening is not so much that your soul is changing. Um, Damascus, I think he uses this analogy of like a sponge. So, it kind of like it could absorb it, but it could also like, desiccate, it can dry up. And so that the idea of sponge kind of expanding with water or sort of like, shrinking in a way, the porousness of the soul, he kind of likens it to that. But through the act of photogogia, when you're drawing down the light, your soul is observing in a way. The soul isn't really doing anything. Um, and so there is a sense in which it's through stillness and quietness and receptivity, utter receptivity, that the gods manifest themselves through this activity, through theurgy.
That's fascinating. So just in case, just so I'm getting this right,
Yeah.
it seems to so there's this kenosis, which is this emptying. So
Hmm.
it's almost alchemical, like you described it. It's
Oh,
like
yes.
our body is the vessel.
Hmm.
Kenosis, we empty ourselves, and then through
Hmm.
the theurgic rite, we draw
Yeah.
down light or the qualities of the gods, this energy, and it's like
Hmm.
our soul saturates with this light. That's very interesting.
And it heats up as well.
Mm,
So just to clarify, the gods don't come down. They never descend in that
mm,
sense. They've descended already into cosmogenesis, hardly. So the gods are all in all, and they're really in everything. So there is, in a sense, a manner in which the god is immediately present right now, this very moment, always with you. But of course, through the, occultation and the sort of the impurities through, let's say, a cosmic descent into the body, these veils start to build on one another. These kitonon, Proclus would refer, the chiton, that garment, um, and as these sort of accrue through the descent through the planetary spheres, I mean, the seven planetary spheres that are, of course, every hermeticist or hermetic literature will inform you is the sort of that the pathway of generation, right? That we've now fallen in a way, or descended, perhaps. We won't get too Gnostic by the fall, but yeah, there's an element of that too, right? So. But by doing so, it's occluded. We're not easily receptive to
mm.
their epiphanies, which of
Yeah.
course can appear at any time. They can appear to whomever they please, and that's one of the sort of the prerogatives of the gods. There is no dictating, the mode and the manner and the time from which a god appears. It's ultimately their will. And I
Mm,
think it's important to like emphasize this idea of will is also contrasted with this idea of choice. The God doesn't even choose to descend because choice by choosing implies an either or. It
mm,
implies also that the God can choose the good or the bad or the not so good. But the gods always, through their activity, through their powers, they are the good. And Plato emphasizes that, the gods, it doesn't matter what the gods are, who the gods are, from what culture, gods are good. They cannot produce evil. And so again, it goes against the more of a Gnostic understanding where, you would have a demiurge that would be possessed by evil motivations for its creations and whatnot. I don't know. I've gone on a little bit of a I'm not sure if I've answered
No,
your question. Where were we?
no, that was really good. That reminds me of
Yeah.
something because there's some essence in there that reminds me of what Paracelsus says, where he talks about he doesn't obviously because of Christianity he doesn't use the term gods, but he talks about cosmic energies coming
Hmm.
into man and creating sickness. But the reason why it creates sickness isn't because of the cosmic energies themselves. It's like there's some kind of disorder within
Mm.
man, and so when the cosmic
Hmm.
energies come in, it just doesn't organized right and sickness arises. But if you were to be in a specific state, the cosmic
Oh,
energies would
yes.
flow into you and there'd be, with your Pythagorean hygiene and your health, you would probably gain those energies more differently. So it seems like this is very interesting because it seems like there is a doing, but the doing is this negation, this emptying, this kenosis. And then
Yeah.
this absorbing of this light, which once again, it doesn't descend as it's interesting. Anabasis, catabasis, or like inside, outside. They're always
Mm,
this.
mm,
These distinctions seem to like kind of dissolve in the ancient way of thinking. The
mm,
the
yeah.
underworld and the internal world are one kind of thing.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's this. It's really interesting. And one thing I want to mention there as well, or to going down this route, you mentioned the vestments, the soma, the body,
Yeah. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's because I've always been interested because when I came into the Western tradition through modern occultism and then have started going
Hmm.
back. And one thing in modern occultism, with Steiner and Theosophists, they're always like, astral body, soul body, everyone has them. Whereas Gurdjieff comes in and he's like, nah.
Mm,
You start off as just kind of an organization of
mm,
substance, of power, and it's through your work that maybe the astral body or something geometrically crystallizes. And this is what I found
mm.
interesting when you said about the sponge and light analogy. It's like something saturates. And when
Yeah.
you saturate, what would you say? When you saturate like sugar powder into water, you
Hmm.
supersaturate it. When the water cools down, it crystallizes. You get like crystals, which are better than power.
Mm,
So
yeah.
is there some kind of is there some kind of element in this in the Platonists and the Theurgists where they talk about different levels of heavenly bodies? I know kind of Proclus mentions an astral body, but is there like
Yeah.
can we go down that route?
Yes, of course. I just before we go there, you're gonna have to remind me, but let me quickly sort of
Yes.
confirm what you said about Paracelsus. In the Mysterious, um, sort of, Iamblichus, and Porphyry are, they're having this kind of back and forth.
Yes.
And Porphyry poses to Iamblichus exactly that question that about the malefic or benefic planets. And, as gods, they're kind of the visible manifestations of the gods on one level. How can that be? How can you have a malefic god then?
Hmm.
And Iamblichus says precisely what Paracelsus was saying, where
Ah.
he said it's your reception of the powers of these gods that make it seem as though they're malefic, but no god is malefic in essence. And it's the manner of our fitness, the epitidaiotes, that allows us to manifest certain characteristics of the sort of, I suppose, the disposition of the planet and its influence in a negative light. For example, Saturn has an element of justice to it and proportion, but then it can come as slowness, rigidity,
Hmm.
constraint. But it's really in the manner in which our bodies are prepared to receive it.
Hmm.
That's having the right,
Hmm.
preparation of your receptacle in order to get it. So yes, it completely echoes what you were saying. As for the different sort of like subtle bodies, Proclus goes into great detail. He's very good at using logical analysis in a way to differ and intuition to sort of differentiate, almost to the point where I think some people are put off by Proclus because he's incredibly difficult to read. His writing is also very difficult. But yes, he talks about the astral body. He talks about the Okema. He talks about the Agoides, which is kind of like the luminous vehicle. So there are, and then of course there's the physical corporeal vehicle, the body itself. So yes, there are different grades, and some, for example, Synesius um, would combine the okema,
Mm.
which is kind of like what Plato, I think, spoke of the okema as sort of the vehicle the planets use and the gods when they're traveling through, through the sort of the
So that's kind of like
um,
the astral
yeah.
body. And is there some
hmm
indication that these bodies are a given? They're automatically there, or they have to be activated, or
So in Descent, they are taken on. It's part of the, I suppose, descent into materiality, in which they're acquired. Um, there's in the Hermetic literature, there's the Kore Cosmo,
mm,
which is one of the seminal works, and actually, because Iamblichus is writing the Mysterious, the first word is really a name, a proper name of a god in the entire body of work, and it's Hermes.
mm,
So literally, Iamblichus's god is Hermes. And in that, so what you're getting is when you're talking about the Hermetic literature for the Kore Cosmo or the Poimandres or whichever one you want to name, it's literally a manifestation, a revelation of the god Hermes. And so Iamblichus is taking Hermetic literature and incorporating that in his theurgical works as well. So he's reading widely across cultures and across different traditions, and he's bringing that into the theurgical practice. And so one of the things is that the gods give gifts. So yeah, it's a conversation between Isis and Horus. And Horus is asking Isis about, how the descent, how materiality was created, how the cosmos was created, how humans descended, and she explains that each god gave a gift, and in that way, it was allowing for embodiment of the soul. The Poimandres is actually the reverse. So in it, if you actually put those two texts side by side, you see that every single gift that is given by the gods for generation and cosmogenesis is then returned by the soul to the god, but in the guise of its opposite. So in a way, something like when you want to slough off a veil or an accretion of something, it's the same gift, but kind of in a more of a negative, I guess, what you in a generative act, it's stained in a way. And so
mm.
when you're reascending, through anagoge, you're giving it back to the god, the appropriate god.
Interesting.
So there is this level, and Porphyry actually, like he kind of he does a lot of writing about this idea that
Okay.
y yeah, each of those seven veils or attributes will be given back, and at the end he believes that that's it, it's done. All of your subtle bodies will be kind of dissipated into the final ascent, the one, and then that's it, it's gone. But Iamblichus believes that those subtle bodies actually are immortal, so the luminous body will always be with you. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Subtle differences. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone like looks at Neoplatonism. Well, everyone looks at there's this kind of thing. It's like Neoplatonism is, or late Platonism is just one thing, but when you kind of get right down to it, it's almost completely different systems depending on who you're reading, in a sense.
Yeah. Different systems, and yet somehow it's a part of the same tradition
Hmm.
in the sense that, one philosopher, one sort of theurgist can bicker about one point with another, and yet that doesn't destroy the integrity of the entire edifice.
Hmm.
It's not a disruption. And I
Hmm.
think this is something that when we look at sort of the entire sort of like ancient Greek philosophical, theological tradition, a lot of times we want to see these antagonisms as radical breaks and departures. But ultimately, that's looking at things through our very, limited perspective.
Mm,
Because we live in a world of strife and conflict, we see these things as incommensurable. Proposition A, proposition B, and somehow there's, how do we resolve it? How do we the coincidentia oppositorum? How do we break through the sort of the divide, this sense of constant embattlement? But we have to see things more from the perspectives of the gods,
mm,
because for them, they're unfolding, they're manifesting their presence, they're manifesting their projects, their various projects throughout time, throughout history. And because of course they're coming at it from not so much historical perspective, but it's through the interactions of the gods in their sort of polycentric manifold that all these things emerge. And ultimately, and this divine, everything that we experience, everything philosophical, theological, poetical, you name it, cultural, is is a way in which the gods are in relation with one another, forming a community. And because the gods are prior, they exist prior to being, they're hyperousios. That means sort of it is their activities and their engagement with one another that manifest the reality that we experience. So when we just switch the perspective, and the more you do theurgy, the more you do these acts, the more you engage in this philosophical and theurgical sort of like the praxis element. The point is to start to get a perspective of the whole from the
mm,
perspective of the gods, as opposed to our own limited perspectives. And it's that activity where we're participating in their intellect as best as we can. And that's the point, I think. It's the idea is like to the best of our abilities, because we're all endowed with certain capacities and our ability to refine ourselves and to engage in these types of acts. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not personally very strong in philosophy. It's something I struggle with, and it takes
same.
me a long time. You as well? Okay. It's one of those things where it's not something I'm gifted with, and yet, I realize that and I work at it, but that working is to get as close as to an activity that corresponds with a god-like vision as possible,
So
as much as humanly possible.
you saying you're not gifted with reading philosophy has just given me so much more confidence, bro, because you're so articulate in your videos. I'm like, oh, if this guy says he's bad at philosophy, oh man, I can do it. I can do it. There's
Oh,
hope. There's
of
hope.
course. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's how much time,
Mm.
and commitment. And that's really what so much it boils down to.
Shifting gears a little bit, I want to ask if you've
Hmm.
seen in your readings this techne of theurgy going along the process of it. So as photogogia happens and light saturates into the soul, and you process upwards and you
Hmm.
slog off, return to the gods what's theirs. Are there indications and signs of this happening? Like, do they talk about certain
Hmm.
powers arising, visions arising in the
Yes.
individual as they go through this process? Can you talk about that a little? Or can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think one of the things that is described, Iamblichus, if only I could remember exactly which book it's located in, the Mysterious, but he speaks about a notion of heat arising. Your body starts to get really warm. And it's in the combination. So there's some interesting, and I tried to make a video about this. Well, I did make a video about this. I tried to sort of elucidate it a little bit, I guess,
Name
but
drop it. Which video was it?
it was the Photogogia
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
video, and this idea of the combination, because again we have two vehicles in some systems, and in other sort of interpretations, it's all kind of And this very soupy mix of different things that are overlapping each other.
Mm.
So you have sort of the algoides okema, and then you have something that would be the pneumatic vehicle as well. So
Mm.
again, there's this strange correspondence. There's some sympathy happening between air and breath and light. And, you know, if you look at the PGM, the most famous Mithras liturgy exactly
Mm.
tells you to breathe in the rays. And so, much ink has been spilt about what does that mean? What does it mean to breathe in light? And again, I think part of my, you know, the aim of my channel is to try to amplify, using Jungian terminology, maybe like to amplify those images and to see the associations and the connections and how they can be applied in practice. But yeah, so one of the things is the body starts to heat up. You're using certain types of breathing exercises. And with that breath, what you are doing ultimately is making yourself physically lighter. You're allowing yourself to be as physically airy as possible. Through this inhalation and exhalation process, you are allowing your body, your pneumatic vehicle to be filled up and allow yourself to rise, to elevate. And similarly, through the rays of the light, through this reception, you're filling your upadoke, you're filling your receptacles. And the gods, you know, even if you read Homer's Iliad, the gods manifest often as pure light. And what I find very interesting is sort of this idea. So they manifest as pure, they're pure light. And behind this idea of luminosity, and the Sufis do a wonderful job also exploring this, is there's ultimate blindness, there's darkness,
Mm.
and there's a lightness like the black light, which is like, or the luminous darkness. There's something that's so bright that it's blinding and that it manifests as darkness, or it is the darkness from which the light emerges. And in this respect, you know, um, when you're engaging Photogogya, which, you can go outside in the midday sun, close your eyes and just do breathing, sit there and breathe or lie down and breathe, you will see images in your mind's eye. You'll see forms, you'll see shapes of light. And depending upon, how much you've purified your receptacle, your soul, your virtues, how you've, even fasted, your, ascetical practices, let's say, you will see different gradations of light. Iamblichus goes into detail. He talks about the intensity. He talks about the density, the movement. Some more smoky, shadowy ones are kind of lower, perhaps daemons, heroes. And as you purify and as you continue at it, you start to see more real, actual, clearer shapes, clearer light. And and that's the experience. And
So this is a
I
very
think,
interesting, like phenomenological, it's a
yeah,
visionary thing. It's not, you're not provoking and trying to visualize something. You're
no,
becoming a receptacle and allowing things to kind of imprint and move your imagination without
that's
your
right.
will.
Yeah. And in a way, I think I was watching one of your videos recently about what was it? It was some sort of, you'll remind me what it is, but the name of it. But it's where they have two people and one's a receiver, and then the one person is the sort of producing these images, and the other person's in the other room, kind of.
Yep. Yeah,
And
that was the self-observation video. And
yeah,
the Gansfield experiment. Yeah, yeah.
the Gansfield. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, Gansfield. Um, and you mentioned elemental perception,
Mm.
right? The moment you start to try to grasp at it, you start to look, oh, this is a banana, this is a bear or whatever.
Mm.
You're starting to, you lose it. You're not
And
as accurate. but then when you go down to the elemental level, right, you're saying those basic sense perceptions, you start to have a higher level of efficacy, if you will, right?
Mm, mm.
And it reminded me of the Chaldean oracles, the first fragment, literally, if I can read it, I have it open in front of me,
Oh,
if I may.
yeah, please do.
So it says here, for there exists a certain intelligible which you must perceive by the flower of mind. So this is the anthos nous.
I
For
love
if,
love the poetry.
yeah, and so it says, if, yeah, it's beautiful. But if it says, for if you should incline your mind toward it and perceive it as perceiving a specific thing, you would not perceive it.
Mm.
For it is the power of strength, visible all around, flashing with intellectual divisions. Therefore, you must not perceive that intelligible violently, but with the flame of mind completely extended, which measures all things except that intelligible. You must not perceive it intently, but keeping the pure eye of your soul turned away, you should extend an empty mind toward the intelligible in order to comprehend it, since it exists outside of your mind. And so, this idea of violence is this idea of grasping at a thing, categorizing it, classifying it, because what you're doing is you're not operating sort of on the level at which sort of this particular activity, this particular ritual, um, is recommending. Essentially, what is happening is that you are doing too much of that work on an analytical, on a psychological level. And so this is about quieting it, but still extending the flower of the mind, but not grasping. And so, and that's that receptivity as well, you know. That's I think one of the hardest things for us to do. Um,
That's one of the main stumbling blocks. I feel a lot of people, especially early on, like people come into
yeah.
the Western esoteric tradition, they have one experience and they're like, I saw a staff in a vision. Therefore,
Mhm.
that was Hermes. Hermes has come to me. I'm the chosen one. And it's like they've just is it
Yeah.
Hermes' stuff or is it just let it be and let it
Mhm.
unfold? Don't like
Yeah.
put more stuff on it. Just
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. I always find it, I'm of two minds. I'm always, I don't want to be too dismissive, but at the same time, I am very dismissive. But when someone's like, I had a dream last night and you know who came to me? It was, Sabazios.
ooh,
It was, Ion. And, it's like, okay. Like, the difficulty, I think, for me personally, and this is maybe my own bias. I'm sure your viewers have, a whole host of diverse interpretations and beliefs about this and opinions, but I think we tend to people who are interested in this esoteric and occult sciences, and particularly, let's say theurgy, they think it's there's a certain naturalness to it. There's an easy path for it.
mm,
You know, if you I think what people fail to realize is that this takes a lot of work. This takes a lot of philosophical training. This takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of reading, a lot of learning. And you can say, of course, in the end, at the final analysis, then you must then, transcend that. Because to contemplate the highest, you don't use it through intellectual or, you know, you don't use it through, you know,
yeah.
sort of
I
that
mean,
type of discursive reasoning.
yeah,
But
not
ultimately,
to get political, but it's just that modern day liberalism where they just want to lay
yeah,
down a wheelchair ramp and just let everyone in, and it's just like it becomes new age slop, and everyone's a god on the inside. It's like no,
I think
this is
I
always
agree.
done by people who are exceptional. It was
Uh,
always done by people
Always,
who are exceptional.
always, and I don't, I'm not elevating myself to that exclusive club by any means, but
Same.
but it was possible to have this quote unquote like rebirth during one's lifetime,
Mm,
but it was also extremely rare to have these visions. And so this is a process that would require multiple lifetimes. If you subscribe to the reincarnationist, perspective, This isn't something that's necessarily accomplished in one lifetime. A lot of times it happened at the end of one's life. So this is this is definitely an ordeal. And one of the things that Iamblichus, how Iamblichus refers to Theurgus in the De Mysteris, is athletes of fire.
Mm.
And, this idea of athlete is very much, there's a certain level of strife, physical overcoming, mental overcoming. It's not a walk in the park. It's not just burning a few incense. And you know what? Honestly, for um, for ritual, for worship, for devotion, which is primarily what I do, you don't need all that. I mean, what I'm meaning to say is you don't need to delve into the deep philosophical interpretations and the comprehensive theurgical rites. Sometimes it's just as simple as burning some candles on the altar in front of the statue of your deity or whichever deity that you're deciding to
I remember
venerate,
there's a
you
quote
know?
I really like from some author, I forget which one, where he says something like, "If you want to do magic, in the end, all you need is a candle and faith." And I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's very
You know what?
interesting."
I agree. I think I agree with that.
Mm.
I think you and I, perhaps, we need something more. We need
Mm.
some some juicier bits to kind of like sink our teeth into. I think we enjoy that.
Oh,
The
yeah.
exploration to the depths, right?
I think there has to be this exploration, but then there's like this boiling down, and it's
Mm,
almost like a bell curve. There's people at the beginning who just kind of don't get it, and there's like the people who expand out, and then right at the very end, you're able to synthesize everything into your own kind of unique thing.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Synthesis is important. Yeah. I think that's the right term as well. And I think, a lot of people are against syncretism,
Mm.
and I think that's not realistic.
Mm.
One of my, go ahead,
I was
speak.
going to say because it's like you said something at the very beginning there that was interesting. You said everyone has their own particular, I forget the word, qualities. You're saying some people are more musical,
Mm,
some people are more athletic.
mm,
And it's like if an athletic guy who's more intellectual tries to do a Sufi mysticism tradition, it's probably not going to work for him. He'll
mm,
continuously feel that he's cutting himself down to fit into something. But if he finds
mm,
something that's more suited to him, more athletic,
yeah,
more philosophical, then that helps him expand and then connect, and maybe then he'll find the mysticism and it will be he'll understand it more and it will connect
yeah,
together, and then finally he'll be able to synthesize something for himself. It's like that's we each have, as you said, we're born with specific principles, and traditions can help us because they're structures in a way, but there
hmm,
comes a point where you will grow within a tradition, and if you do it properly, you will hit the borders of that tradition, and you'll need to,
hmm, yeah,
you're gonna have to do
hmm,
something about that.
yeah, absolutely. So this idea, it's like, with the athlete, like, he's following his or her eros.
Mm.
It's the eros. This is what guides us. And in the Phaedrus, in Plato's Phaedrus, and in sort of I think also perhaps was it the Cratylus? No, the Symposium. There's the idea of like these chains, and Proclus, all the Neoplatonists talk about these chains that they descend, and each one at the head is a particular leader god. It's the hegemon. And it's this, you know, I don't want to call it infinite, but there's this like amazing train of synthemata symbols, items, and souls that follow in the train of their particular leader god. And whatever whatever drives us, whatever moves us, whatever, strikes up our eros, because nothing in theurgy can be done without that fire of Eros that propels us, that compels us to reach out to whether it's an outwards or inwards, whichever direction you're moving here, it doesn't really matter. But it's that Eros that allows us to get in touch with the one. And the one, and I think this is something that needs to be emphasized, is that like the one is not some thing. It's not a monotheistic thing. It's not an entity. The one neither is nor is one. And ultimately, each God that you follow, whichever you're following in your train, and it doesn't have to be necessarily one, each God is a one or the one. So, in the sense that this ineffable sort of source of individuation, this principle of individuation, is each God. So, when Plotinus or, Proclus can say, monos pro monon, you know, one, one to the one, what you are doing is you are actually establishing a relationship between yourself as an existential individual, a complete, unique individual, to the unique individuality of that God, which actually is prior to anything and everything. That God, in its oneness, is an expression of its huparxis, which is its existence, which makes that God utterly unique. And that's what ultimately what a henad is. When you read certain texts and they speak of, henads as gods, henad is a god, like from the idea of hen, right? The term hen, which is like one or unit. You know, it is the barest indication of what a unit is in and of itself. And that's what each god is as a henad. And fundamentally, the idea is existence precedes essence. So we talk about being, for example, the monotheistic God, right? It's a lot of ontotheology,
Hmm.
right? So it's this idea that, God and being, the whole of being are one. God might be more immanent, God might be more transcendent, but, he's singular, he's one, it's a he has these whatever attributes, and he hates every other single God because he's absurd. He somehow consumes them all into his own essence and then calls them demons, but we won't go into that too much. But the idea is, you know, the gods are hyperousios. That means they're ultimately the tension between the god is what allows for the unfoldment of cosmogenesis. And so, in a sense, everything around you, all the materials, all the objects, yourself included, they resonate and vibrate. They vibrate because of this ultimate tension, because the one and matter, the principle of matter, are essentially the same. They're coming at it from two different sides, but they ultimately are both ungraspable, unarticulable, they're ineffable. Without the one, you cannot have procession ultimately as a principle of individuation, but then without matter to receive it, nothing can come about. So, in a sense, the human is not at the end of the cosmic sort of unfoldment. The human is in the center, in the middle of it. So the one, exactly. So we are in this interesting position where we're a mediating element here. So yeah, it's sorry for that was a
Yeah,
lot of,
that was so interesting. That's very interesting.
but the tension in the God is between the reason why being emerges from the gods and from each god is because the god is divided in their tension between their existential uniqueness, their huparxis, and their powers. And the contrast between the power and their existential unity of who they are, who each god is as a unique individual, creates the unfoldment of being, a doubling of itself. And so Proclus goes into great detail to articulate this, but that tension is also expressive in the human individual, where, for example, Richard, you have a name, and that uniquely identifies you, but there's something about you specifically that makes you unique.
Hmm.
There could be other Richards. There could be other. people who are categorized as human beings. You belong to certain classes, genera, all these different types of ways of organizing and conceptualizing. But in a way, there's a tension between you as a unit of, let's say, as a member of the human, capital H human, the universal human. But then there's also something absolutely fundamentally irreducible about you as a unique individual.
That's interesting. So the gods have uniqueness and powers, just so I understand you. So
Yeah,
a god, so gods have their each individual uniqueness, but
yeah,
there's powers that gods can have, and some gods may have similar powers. Like you may pray to a specific god for healing, but there may
yeah.
be another god that also heals. So there's a similar
Yes,
power, but each god is
absolutely.
unique. So there's the
Absolutely.
uniqueness and there's the powers.
Absolutely. So, for example, yes, perfect illustration. For example,
I'm following you.
yes, yes. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. There was this one. So, for example, like, Dionysus and, Shiva. This was something I recently got into a little bit of an argument with with someone about this. You know, these are not the same God. And there's a lot of discourse online on YouTube where, it's this like grand, sort of like slightly, conspiratorial
Hmm.
sort of like, oh, but this God is actually this God.
Comparative
And
religion bros are crying right now.
right, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but it's ultimately it's a God can have the same activity, they can have the same powers across traditions, even within a tradition. That doesn't mean they're the same God.
Hmm.
Gods, so this was something that was interesting because this is again something that Iamblichus honed in on in his work, where, Aristotle and Porphyry would say, it doesn't really matter what the name the god is, as long as in our minds we both have a conception that we're both talking about this one God. What does it matter, what is that Shakespearean thing, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet, like as if, we can substitute names for things. But Iamblichus disagrees wholeheartedly, and he says, like the name itself should not be translated. The name itself was given by the God in a revelation to the best of our ability to comprehend what was given to us. And it delights the gods to be called by the names that they use themselves. But we don't ultimately know what the names they use to one another, with one another.
Interesting.
But the power of the name. And, he says, don't, what is it, the Barbara nomina,
The
that
barbarous names, yeah.
that's right. It's, you can't, make them sensible and make sense. You're removing their efficacy, you're removing their power, because ultimately a divine name is the God. It is a manifestation of the God. Each name is an agalma, which means like a statue.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
so, so names and words, they have a certain energia, they have a certain activity, they have certain power. And by uttering them and articulating them, they start to resonate, they vibrate. And, one of the things I really admire Empedocles, one of those pre-Socratic philosophers and mystics. But, he says, he tells his pupil that he must, breathe in these words and put them down in his densely compacted diaphragm, his phrenes. And he
Interesting.
says, if you don't compact them deep in your phrenes, they will fly away back to where they are meant to be, back to their home. And so I've always been obsessed with this notion of words as entities because go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
oh no, no, no. It's complete what you're saying.
No, I just feel like I'm just going on and on here, but
No, when you said like, because I kind of want to hear what you were going to say, but I was just going to say, I just wanted to like really jump in and just be like,
yeah.
what you're talking about here is really interesting with the names, and because this is one thing I wanted to mention about another part of the techne of the
Mm,
theurgy, because it's
hmm.
like there's this
Yeah.
kenosis, this emptying, there's this filling. Well, there's the kenosis, there's the breath work now that we've mentioned, but now we're getting into something more akin to mantralization or
Mm, mm,
intoning certain words.
yeah.
And when you mention the barbarous names and the Mithraic liturgy, whenever you look through that, there's all those like EIO, like just the E's and
Yeah.
the R's and the O's, and they're all like
Yeah. Yeah.
compacted together.
Yeah.
There's because I wanted to kind of just get your take on this as well. The in the East, they have their mantras, their aums and whatnot. But
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
Western equivalent of that seems to be ERO. And there seems to be all of these traditions that continue into the modern day. Fundamentally, a lot of the Rosicrucians, in fact, pretty much all Rosicrucian schools at one point or another will teach their members to intone the vowels because,
Hmm.
words are sacred and all words are building blocks made of letters, and the tones in between the letters, the things that bind all the words together, are the vowels.
Hmm.
So instead of saying the names of gods, if you intone the vowels continuously, it's kind of like a catch-all that gathers all of the energies of all of the gods, and you basically bring those energies into you. And the interesting thing about what you said about the Phrenes as well, I think there's a bit of a mixture in modern Rosicrucian schools with Eastern stuff. There's this
Hmm.
thing that happened in around the 1920s where Kundalini yoga got fused with Western ceremonial magic and everyone went crazy. And so a lot of the in modern Rosicrucian schools they'll try to place the vowels over chakras. But I
Hmm.
believe what used to happen is they used to just put all of the vowels in one place in
Hmm.
in the specific like in the core of the body, either in the heart or either in the solar plexus, and then you'd get these phenomenological or somatic experiences. Your feet would vibrate, or your body would feel fill with heat, or you'd start to
Hmm.
see certain things through this intoning. And it's so
Yeah.
fascinating that it just comes. It's all connected to theurgy.
Yeah. Yeah. And Nicomachus said he had written that the vowels correspond to the soul and the consonants are the body.
Oh, that's interesting.
So ultimately, when you are, intoning these, you are embodying something. You are building something. You are collecting certain presences.
That's very
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and that also, functions when you know, you're setting up, a particular secret spot. You can intone to the east, to the west, to the, north, to the south. You're situationalizing yourself. You're putting yourself in a place. You're creating a topoi. You're creating a place whereby you're fixing, in a way, the constant flux, and you are praying to the hour. You're praying to the day. And so a lot of this comes with Egyptian magical practice as well, right? You're praying to the place, the genius loci. And in that sense, you are, in my opinion, you're allowing all attention, you're gathering all the presences, you're gathering all the deities that preside over each of the hours or whatever, and you're finding that one kairotic moment. You're demonstrating that so that your operation will be realized and maximalized. But yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting also is, I think I'm sure it's in all these Rosicrucian texts. I'm not as familiar as you are about these, but Aleister Crowley also, I think he had that famous image where he has his finger up to his mouth,
Mm-hmm.
or in a gesture of silence. And Harpocrates, the Egyptian child god, um, in all of its iconography, it's raising precisely that finger up to the mouth in silence. Sige is this sense of like silence, but it's also something that could be hissed, just in
Mm-hmm.
intoning it as well. And there's a sense in which it's actually through silence that we contemplate or we engage with the God in its most supra-celestial sense. It's the intelligible God. It's the God that is not confined by the body, which is the consonant, nor the vowel, which is the soul. It transcends both, and it could only be worshipped in silence. And I think it kind of plays into that notion as well.
Mm. Oh,
Um,
100%. There's this, not to make it sound too new agey, but the idea of the like intoning the mantras is there's this kind of vibration, and as you intone them, you eventually kind of silence them, and you follow the vibration. And there's this teaching where it's like silence
mhm.
isn't a lack of sound, silence is just an incredibly
Yes.
high vibration.
Yeah,
So you're being led to silence by by the mantras, by the vowels.
absolutely. Absolutely. There was this I think there was this I'm trying to Hugo von Hofmannsthal. He was a 19th century. Are you familiar with his name?
No, it sounds vaguely familiar, but please go
He
on.
he he wrote some poetry. He was a genius, and he had so much potential. I think he died, I think, rather young. He started writing librettos for operas, and anyway, he was very much in that sort of, I think, the Viennese crowd, very cultured. But he wrote this one sort of like pseudo autobiographical story about, you know, giving up on poetry because, he felt that the power of poetry, the words, he had his philosophical crisis, existential crisis as well, where it's like the word cannot convey, poetry no longer has the power. And there was this recent French, it's called the Lord Chandos' letter, I believe. And there was this recent French contemporary author, and he wrote like a response or a reply to the Lord Chandos' letter that Hugo von Hofmannsthal had written, where he had given up, the idea of writing poetry at all. This crisis of meaning that occurred in like, the late 19th century, early 20th century. And he said, silence. He made a mistake. Hugo von Hofmannsthal made a mistake. Silence is not the opposite of noise. And just like you were saying, like it resonates on a deeper level. It's like the bathos. It's the depths. It's the abyss. It's what the Gnostics speak of when they talk about the bathos, the bathoi, this idea of the abysses, this idea of absolute, it's a presence. And that depth is a presence. There's something there. There's a feminine quality to it.
Mm.
And it's an entity. It's not it's not the absence of something, it's a presence of something. And yeah. And Peter
Yes.
Kingsley once said, I was listening, I really love Peter Kingsley, but he had said once that we we use our words so frivolously. We use it so carelessly. And if you actually think about the human life, whatever we are allotted, our fate, 80 years, 70 years, 90 years, there's a finite number of words we will speak in our lifetime. And that's it. And that's all you have. And in that sense, it's like you must use your words carefully, intentionally, so that they resonate with power and fidelity. Because so often we are so wasteful. And then before you know it, we haven't even said one single important thing in our entire life, one meaningful thing. And I think it's such a waste. Just to put that into a perspective, we only have a finite number of words, and I think that sense of embodiment of the word is incredibly important because the words can penetrate your mind, they can penetrate your body. And one of the things I find very fascinating, I find it's rather haunting, is the idea of, the foreign word, the word not even necessarily foreign, but the one that is nonsensical. It doesn't mean anything. And you get that in a lot of the PGM, right? You got these quote unquote nonsense words.
Mm.
Or the voces magicae or voces mysticae, this idea of this magical name or word that really doesn't mean anything to our own conceptions and minds. But when that is allowed to enter your receptacle, when you take that word and you memorize it and it becomes, you know, you learn it by heart, like quite literally, you learn it by heart.
You
You
stamp it
put
on
it.
your heart.
Yes, and in the Egyptian sense, the heart is the seat of intelligence, right?
Mm.
It's precisely there where we contemplate sort of the the profundities of life and emotion and everything is there. It what it does is it's a foreign thing that is now in the presence of your body, and what it does is it alienates you from yourself in that reflection on this mysterious, incomprehensible word that has a signification of some sort, but it's beyond intellect. It's beyond human knowing. It's coming from the gods. In a way, it creates the other inside you. It creates a home for something to dwell that is foreign and wholly not of your own. And you cannot use your intellect to grasp it and to subdue it. It becomes something that embodies you. And there's a scary aspect of that. There's a frightening aspect of that. When you start to take language seriously, when you
Mm.
start to realize that you can't just play with language without reality being affected,
Mm.
without their repercussions, without manifestations of things that are unknown, unanticipated. And I think that's what we've done. That's what we've done in our culture. That's what we've done, in our societies. And, this isn't even a new thing because, the Greeks, Iamblichus criticized the Greeks themselves for being such a young-minded civilization or peoples where, they were always after the new thing and the innovations. And it's all exciting. It's all very nice, but he credited the Egyptians for being able to hold on to these ancient, time-honored practices and language that honored the gods in the appropriate way.
Mm. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
now you said something there about stamping it onto your heart and memorizing it.
yeah,
It becomes a part of you. And I
yeah.
wanted to kind of go back to kind of memory and how we said, the work it takes too long, it will take over multiple lives. And this concept of this idea of not necessarily remembering past lives, but gaining the knowledge from multiple lives. There's that famous story of, well, one of the claims, hagiographic claims from Pythagoras is that he
Hmm.
was a warrior from Troy
Hmm.
who did some great work. And after his death, Hermes came to
Yeah.
him and said, "My son, I'll give you a gift. What do you want?" And he said, "I want to remember everything, from this point onwards." So
Mm.
I'm paraphrasing hardcore,
Yeah,
but
yeah, of course.
fundamentally, Pythagoras has this eternal memory that extends. Uh, Let me put it this way: it extends. He has a chronology outside of time and space, so he
Hmm.
has memories that go back farther, and this connects to the Platonic doctrine of learning is actually remembering. There's
Yeah,
this idea of remembrance. There's this idea that, you really try to think of something and then the inspiration where something just, an idea or concept just appears in your mind and it illuminates like a constellation. All of the stars
yeah,
suddenly, all of the stuff like this, ideas in your mind are like different stars and they all of a sudden they just interconnect and that's kind of almost a remembering.
yeah.
Is that, can we talk about this kind of tradition of memory or is there anything that extends like that into the Neoplatonic world where they talk about memory in this way, or the
Yeah, of
theurgic
course.
way?
Yeah, I think the idea, I guess, there's the idea of anamnesis, right? But then there's this idea of mnemosene.
Hmm.
She's the mother of the muses. And
And that's
in
the
a
goddess.
way,
That's the goddess of memory, right?
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Memory, memory is a living thing. Memory is not just a psychic activity. It's not just a cognitive thing. It's not something to just simply recall information.
Hmm.
Memory is it's a re-embodiment of the past into the present. It is, in a sense, it's an intrusion. But in a sense, it's interesting because what makes it alive is the fact that it is always it's a tension between the same and the different. So in that sense, it's when you recall something, you're never recalling it through memory exactly as it was. It
Mm.
always comes in a slightly different form. So you can never fully recall that memory exactly, imagistically, exactly as it once happened. There's always an otherness, always an alterity to it. But memory itself is precisely the poets. It's the work of the poets. It's the work of hymnists. It is a recounting of, it's a recounting and a healing in a way. It's allowing oneself to give presence. And I'm trying to articulate this in the best way possible. It's rather challenging because Proclus speaks about these logoi, and these are measures. These are things that comprise our soul. And
Mm.
they're already there. They're already established. So in a sense, everything we learn, everything we discover through knowledge is something that we already know. We are simply bringing it forth, and through this act of remembering, we're reconstituting it, bringing it back together into its unity, and in a sense, sacrificing it and returning it back to the gods.
Mm.
Everything is implanted. So, for example, the synthemata, or these symbols, these things, the demiurge, a demiurge, we can go into that as well, but sort of the demiurge through cosmogenesis implants these tokens, these symbols throughout the cosmos in material things, in human souls. And that act of remembering is precisely to rediscover those things and to bring it to the present mind and to then give it back through the gods' generosity to return that generosity in a giving of thanks.
That's
So in a
that's
way,
yeah.
memory is closing the circle.
That's very interesting.
Memory
So
is allowing us to close that circle.
yeah, so the demiurge, the architect of the universe, places things within matter, which
Yeah,
we are well, and we are matter as well. So we draw that out through memory, and then it's
yeah,
returned through the gods. So then, like this expression in poetry and music are then returned to the gods,
yeah.
or
That's why
things
a
like that.
hymn would be a sacrifice. So, for example,
Yeah.
one of the ways of a theurgical practice is precisely that, is to sing a hymn. So, if
So,
you look at the
memorizing hymns is actually almost like a spiritual practice. There is actually something spiritual
absolutely,
about memorizing.
absolutely. And if you try to memorize a poem, you process it very differently.
Mm.
You embody it. You start to feel it physically. Those images, those words, the intonation, the meter, the rhyme, all of that you can adjust and change. And when you do it from memory, it's so much different than just reading it from a piece of paper. And what's interesting is just like, again, it's inhabiting you and you're evoking it, and the God is present when that happens. Like reading itself is a form of form of spiritual practice. For example, the Greeks, they wouldn't necessarily read. Reading a text wasn't meant to be read quietly in your mind because they didn't really differentiate the notion of speech in your head versus speech outside of through articulated through your mouth. But this idea is that when you're reading a text, you have to read it out loud. People might get really annoyed,
That's very
es-
interesting.
especially if they're, around you trying to work and you're reading out loud. But when you read aloud because what you're doing is you know, again, we don't need to go into the details of, the oral poetry and sort of the idea of writing versus orality and what's happening there originally. But um, what I like about sort of this idea is that this there's this aesthetic term called, well, we talk about synesthesia, right? Using the
Mm,
different senses and combining them together but there's this ekphrasis, is this idea of a description that is functioning in such a manner that by reading it or listening to it, it's evoking images
yeah.
and imagery, powerful. And ekphrasis also translates in a way to energeia. And so there is this sense in which the mental image is being evoked powerfully through that reading out loud of the text. And in a way, it is an evocation of the God and a bringing of their presence, a manifestation of their presence. And yeah,
That's
so
beautiful. Okay.
it's, but this is the thing. I think this is what I try to do in my channel. I try to make what comes across as mundane, banal, things that we take for granted,
Yes.
and try to orient it in such a manner that it becomes new again and imbued with a certain level of power and presence of the gods. Because I think we have so much philosophical, metaphysical baggage over centuries and centuries and centuries. And there's this one idea. It's like, okay, you can look at the history of ideas, and you're like, oh yeah, but this philosopher in the third century said this, or this one in the 17th century said this. So it's not like it disappeared or went away. But somehow in our culture as it is today, there it has to be reawakened
Mm.
because there's a certain passivity that we've fallen into. Maybe,
That,
obviously a lot of people,
yeah, and
yeah,
I was gonna say that's what's happened with reading nowadays. Reading has become a kind of a passive reception. I'll read a romance novel instead of this
yeah,
kind of active getting into it and what
and
you would say.
yeah. And I think like, people in our circles would be like, very much aware of the problems of materialism and sort of
Mm.
the way in which, this current state of affairs, intellectual state of affairs, philosophical, this meaning crisis, all these things have unfolded. But at the same time, it's rediscovering, I hate the word reenchantment because again, the world is already enchanted. There is no need for a reenchantment. It already presumes that somehow we're coming at it from a very, gray, inanimate world, which again is the materialist perspective.
Yes, we need to
Um,
dissolve materialism. That's what needs to happen.
but what's interesting is I think alchemically we need to transmute materialism
Yes.
in a sense that we have to realize that again, matter itself is not devoid of the gods. It's not devoid of divinity. It's receptive. Has a certain lack. It has a certain way in which it creates a receptacle, but it's not, and the passivity, we can talk about the passivity of matter, but even so, matter has a certain, even in its passivity, there's a certain power associated with its passivity. And that sounds rather paradoxical because, we're looking at it from a very Aristotelian perspective of passive and active. But again, this is one of the things about the traditionalists, right? Like they're adopting and adapting a lot of these Aristotelian and Platonic premises that haven't been interrogated, they haven't been
Mm.
revivified and reinterpreted in a more holistic lens. And a lot of it have to do with monotheistic presumptions. And again, I think, metaphysics is not going to be exciting for very many people.
Yeah.
But, but
I mean, it's exciting for me, but
there we go. There we go. But it's again, it helps to realize how much of the assumptions that we make about our metaphysics and the nature of a God, the nature of reality, how much is dependent on a very non-nuanced and overly simplifying and very confusing set of terminologies. And that really dictates how we can open this up to real living practice.
mm, that
Yeah.
yeah, that's very beautifully well said. Well said. One thing you mentioned the your channel a little bit back, and you mentioned the traditionalists again, and I wanted to ask, just completely shifting gears and derailing
Of
this
course.
conversation, Abbas,
Yeah, no, no, by
but
all
like,
means.
but I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to ask. as well, going back to your channel, everyone who's listening to this, go to Abbas's channel, like and subscribe. But like
Thank you.
with your channel, your sources are like amazing. You know, you have Iamblichus, you have Platonists, but then you've got like Sufi guys, and then you go to
Yeah.
alchemy, and then you've found
Yeah.
like certain traditionalists, yes,
Yeah.
Korban and
Yeah.
Algis. And I
Yeah.
gotta say, like, how did you find these guys? How do you find your sources? And when you come upon something, how do you know it's kind of good and you separate the wheat from the chaff? Because just a little, what I'll add on to the addendum of that, when we were talking about metaphysics, one thing I found recently is where a person's metaphysics, they haven't decided rationally. I have this idea where I think people decide on their metaphysics almost from an irrational subconscious aesthetic desire. Like they aesthetically like a certain metaphysics, and
Mm.
a certain intuition, an aesthetic intuition, like grafts onto a certain ontology or metaphysics of the world, and then they rationalize it almost like post hoc. And it's
Yeah.
like I find people almost find sources this way. Like they'll say like, "Oh, I was just in the world and I came upon this, this, and this, and look what it says." But it's almost like there's something in them that aesthetically is finding a narrative and then post hoc applying evidence to it. But like, how do you do it? How did you find these guys? Because I'm always impressed when you're like, "Oh yeah, this Sufi master says this," which is the same as this alchemist. I'm like, how does he find these guys?
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, I suppose like before, many years before I started the channel, I mean, the channel was, I think, early COVID, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to lose my mind if I don't do something productive with my time. Before that, I was a traditionalist. You know,
Ooh.
yeah, so I was very much um
Now there are
yeah,
different flavors. Were you Gunonian
sure.
or were you more?
You know, I so I was very interested with this concept of aristokratia, right? Or sort of the aristocratic
Yep.
soul, right? And and I think there was this one magazine or journal, I think it was exactly by that name, and it was, at the time very what would you call it? Taboo,
Mm.
perhaps, right? It was like, it was Guinon, it was Evola, it was Frithjof Shun, and again, it's like, against the modern world, right?
Hmm.
Was it the revolt against? No, what was that Evolian one? Revolt against
Yeah.
modernity?
No,
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 anyway,
Revolt Against the Modern World. That's the one.
yeah, okay, that's yeah. So anyway, and I found those very interesting, and particularly I really enjoyed. I read all of Guinon's works. I read
Damn, really?
Yeah, yeah, I have too many books. And Evola, I've read most of Evola and Frithjof Shun and Titus Burckhardt
You heard
and
it here, everybody. Abbas is based.
there we go. There we go. Yeah, and it's yeah, it was very interesting. Again, the comparative religion, the universalism, but I think I realized that there is no capital T tradition.
Oh.
Um Yeah,
So,
so
so you read them, but then you negated them and were like, mm-mm.
no, but no, of course not. No, I was an acolyte. I was, I had definitely fallen in deep, and I was admired because I think I realized that they opened up sort of, of course, you get your own sense if
Mm.
if you're grounded enough, but you get a sense that, something's not quite right in our world, right?
So it's not that
Um,
they opened a door, it's that they showed you a set of doors that you didn't know previously existed.
Exactly, exactly. It was like things again, like things that you intimated through, like what you were saying, through practice, through observation, through experience, and then you realize that something's missing.
Mm.
And so I was, yeah, and I think, yeah, I admire a lot of their work, and I did for many years. I read, very diligently, but then I realized I came across the work of Peter Kingsley. And it was interesting because, you have built up an edifice of an intellectual edifice.
Mm.
And anything that comes against it, you fight against. You're like, no, that's not right. It has to be this way. And this sort of, you know, anyway, I'm not going to remember it, but the sense of orthodoxy starts to prevail, right? You start to be
Mm.
like, oh, okay, so this is how it is and everything else. This is grounded in metaphysics. There's no other option. This is the undergirding of all of reality. And then you start to realize, oh, metaphysics is a little bit more, you know, contested.
Mm.
There's a lot more happening there. And one metaphysical system will compete against another. And you start to learn that simply, and this is a prejudice I had before, something that's old doesn't necessarily make it truer.
Yeah.
Something that is, an antiquated notion doesn't necessarily make it somehow more in line with the way things really are. I think as I learned more about philosophy, as I studied more of the different types of religions, you start to wonder, like, can you collapse one into another? But of course, the traditionalists would say no, each one is its own thing. And there was a lot of traditionalists who were very much against syncretism. It was like a dirty word along with a lot of the a lot of them traditionalists. You have to stick to one tradition and then you ascend. Anything else is a counter initiation or, whatever they want to say.
Yeah. This
Uh,
is
you
why
know, uh,
I didn't like Gunan at all. Not gonna lie.
yeah, yeah, and not to say there isn't, profundity there for someone who's starting off on the path, but I
Yeah.
think whatever that path might be, all the different paths that emerge. But again, it works very much like what was the Acts of Thomas, the Gnostic one, the hymn of the Pearl. You've read this,
Mm.
right? And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
yeah, of course. And so again, it acts as a catalyst
Mm.
and it allows the soul to recall sort of that divine name that was given to it by its angelic other before incarnation. And that's the token whereby you can return. And then your mind then you start to realize that everything is reverse. Everything is almost backwards in the way our lives are set up. And I think partly what also I think the Phaedrus also does that as well. So you get certain conceptions in Plato where, matter is almost like considered evil or demonized or disregarded or considered kind of like tainted. But then later on in other works in Plato, you start to see that, matter, but maybe the Timaeus, for example, you start to see that matter has more of a divine property. But the purpose was those initial works were meant to be read, of course, at the beginning. So there was an order in which a schema by which you would read these. It was like the Iamblichus talks about that as well. There's like a Timaeus would be one of the last, or the Parmenides would be one of the
Mm.
last works that you would read, right? And you're essentially, you know, as you're doing the practices, as you're learning more, you're ascending through these different revelations of the Platonic texts. So again, it serves as a catalyst to turn back and to revert the anagoge, right? It is, you know, um,
That's very.
I don't know. I don't know what the question was.
So
Gosh,
we were talking about sources, sorry, and we just went
oh,
way off.
sources. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My
Because
goodness.
no, no, but that worked. That worked. 'Cause- so it's like you found the traditionalists first,
I
and then
did.
like, how did you find like Mayrank? Because that's one guy who I'm like, no one knows who Mayrank is, and then you're like,
Oh yeah.
Gustav Mayrank, the green face, and I'm like, this guy, what?
Yeah, I was reading the group and I noticed that you
Mm,
were you were also doing some deep dives and I was like, wow, this is good. This is good that he's doing this. This is fantastic. You're very much practical based. You're very much deep in the occult, esoteric sort of praxis.
mm,
And it's very admirable because I think
yeah,
so often you can just get stuck in the theoretical and the philosophical and metaphysical, and then people are like, well, what does that mean for my everyday, right?
yeah.
And I think you provide a very good, I think that's a great exercise.
Mm,
Yeah, I remember him. they included that in one of the issues, right? I think
Yeah,
one of
the
the
what is it?
quotes
The
for
Path of Awakening. So it
yeah,
was just that one little excerpt, and then from there you were like, who is this guy?
absolutely, absolutely. And I read all of his works, and this is what I do. I think people underestimate the reference lists. I think
Mm,
you know, and those side notes and those footnotes, and you know, you have to delve in. If something catches your eye when you're reading a text, and you know, you end up, you know, you end up jumping from one thing to the other. That's interesting, and that's interesting, and then before you know it, you have like 15 books that you have to get through, and you're on
yes.
this strange journey, this fantastical journey
And then you look at
across
your
literature.
bookshelf and you weep.
Yeah, and then you look at your pocketbook and you know, and then you weep. That's
Yes.
the worst,
Oh
especially
yeah.
when the some of these academic texts, you know, if
Oh
you know,
God, the Walter J.
if
Fonnegraaff one where it's like $150 for his Hermetic book, and you're like, oh,
oh my gosh,
honey, we're
yeah,
not
there's
eating tonight.
yeah, or the Brills, you know, some of those Brill
Oh,
works are ridiculous.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
250 for the Book of Ju.
yeah. There was this interesting one. It was like Walter Hanegraaff, and I think it was his student Simon Cox. I think it was like a graduate student of his. I'm not sure. I could be mistaken entirely, but did this great. He wrote this great book called The Subtle. I think it's called The Subtle Body.
Ooh.
Definitely check it out. I mean, it's one of those. Why is this so priced so high? But it's interesting in the sense that I think uh, Simon was this. It's so funny. He keeps on going to you remember there was this 90s Batman series
Oh.
cartoon,
Yeah. The
you
cartoon
know,
one,
that
yeah.
was more like Art Deco inspired, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
It's the one where
Was very
Mark
interesting.
Hamill's the Joker.
That's right. That's the one. Yeah. Yeah. He like references the Batman series like several times throughout this work. I'm like,
Really?
okay, all right. We understand that you enjoyed the series. Okay, let's get on with it. But he kind of allowed him there was this one episode where it's like this occult Japanese text that Batman comes across, and it's about like the chi and the different types of sensitive parts of the body where you touch the person in a coordinated manner and they die, right? You know, one of those
Mm.
Kill Bill situations, right? And so he was obsessed with this idea of the chi and these, you know, touch points that can bring death, and he started learning karate, and he talks about his like spiritual journey and his practice going to Buddhist monasteries and delving into Chinese alchemy, and he became obsessed with this idea of like figuring out what is the subtle body. And he ends up getting a master and training for however many years. And anyway, it was a very interesting, and he goes into 19th century theosophers and occultists and talks about all the different, and talks about Jung as well, but he talks about all these different ways
Dang.
in which,
And all from Batman.
all from Batman, can you imagine? And so what he actually ends up concluding about the subtle body, because like even within traditions, you know, like for example, the Chinese alchemical tradition, there is no consistency of
Hmm.
what the subtle body is. But he
Yes.
ends on an interesting note, though, because he says maybe there isn't one subtle body. Maybe there aren't two or three subtle bodies. Maybe there's you know, a plethora of subtle bodies, and each one, it's a subtle body is not what it is ontologically, but what it does,
Yeah.
right? And so it really
Wow.
depends on and each subtle body can open up worlds. Each different one opens up a different world to you. And I think I've started to see
Damn.
things through this manner where it's like, you know, there is a way in which there is multiple avenues that can make you lose your mind, but you
Mm.
know, ultimately they're interesting. You can
Yeah.
explore it.
No, that's amazing. That's like
And
Blavatsky's
yeah.
getting vindicated with her like seven subtle bodies.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Gurdjieff kind of went that route, but then I think he synthesized them down because it's one of those things. There may be seven subtle bodies, but then you can kind of get autistic about it and be like, this is this and only this, and this is this and only this. And
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
just kind of he stopped
Yeah.
talking about etheric body, he stopped talking about mental body, and so by the end of Gurdjieff's kind of seminal work, Beelzebub's Tales, he just talks about planetary body, astral body, and then causal body or body of the soul. So
Mm.
he synthesizes it down. But there's other works where he does talk about this mental body in between the astral and the causal. And so,
Yeah,
that's so interesting. That's so
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And I recently came across something from Lord Kelvin. I don't know
Lord,
when he was, 20th
ooh,
century, 19th century, but this idea that there's a differentiation between the corporeal level and the physical level. So normally we'd think physical
ooh,
corporeal, is all the
yeah,
same plane, but physical is underneath the corporeal. And so when we measure physical reality, let's say atoms, we're descending into the physical materials, physical substrate. But the physical substrate is not observable. It's not really a thing in
yeah.
itself. It's through the measurement of the tool itself that we're bringing the physical into the corporeal, and therefore we manifest it. But
That's
it's in a
interesting.
sense, yeah, in a sense, it's a plane of being that's somehow below us, but that can only come to us through these tools of measurement and instrumentation,
That's
and
fascinating.
yeah, it's fascinating. It's
That's very,
really,
it kind of reminds me, I think Steiner has this whole thing on the physical and the etheric body being actually the same thing. It's just one is slightly, he uses higher, but it's
yeah,
like the
yeah,
ether is this undercurrent or the vital, he says, Paracelsus calls the etheric body the vital depth. There's this
mm,
undercurrent. So this physical
hmm,
undercurrent, and then there's the corporeal, what we kind of see as representation.
yeah,
That's so
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. This is what I enjoy. I enjoy this. I think like, as long as, you know, we can think these things, and I think our thoughts, for better or for worse, influence the way we perceive reality, of course, right? And so
Obviously.
by expanding our conceptions and definitions and
Mm.
becoming more, I guess, open to them, we're opening up worlds. And I think there's a danger to that, of course. But I think given if you ground it in virtue, you
Mm.
ground it in ethics, you ground it in a relationship to the divine, I think that's where you're safe. I'm always, you know, when someone's, making a sacrifice to Cthulhu, I'm always a little bit suspect, I'm like, okay, you know, yeah,
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I
yeah,
100% agree.
yeah.
Oof. Well, thank you so much, Abbas,
Of
for
course.
coming along, and we did a long one there. We did a long one, almost 2 hours, I think.
Oh my goodness. I was looking at your earlier interviews. It's like, I'm not sure if I can make it for an hour and a half. And I was like, geez, do I have enough to talk about? But
Yeah,
yeah, this was
no,
great.
yeah, no, thank you so much, so much.
Of course.
Can you tell people where they can find you? I mean, I don't think you have a
Yeah.
Twitter. It's just the YouTube, or like tell people what you're up to, what they can expect.
Well, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Abbas the Alchemist. And, I've been on hiatus for a bit of time. I haven't really done a proper video in a while. I've been ill. I haven't been feeling 100%. I've also been traveling, so I'm sure that contributes to things as well. But yeah, I hope to, I'm not sure if I hope to expand the channel, but I want people who are serious about this and who are moved erotically, who have a desire, to learn, a desire to deepen their practice, to
Yes.
not even make it it's not a self-serving practice. It's a commitment to the gods and, whichever gods. And I think as long as people are interested in that, I'm willing to make those types of videos. I think it's a smaller, admittedly, it's a little bit of a smaller bubble, smaller subset of the population who would be interested by these things. I find, like, we were talking earlier, I think there's
Yeah.
an element of people enjoy what is it? Sort of a rereading of the basic texts without delving too deeply. And they're satisfied with that. But,
Mm,
that's fine. That's fine. To each their own. But I think for someone who really thirsts,
mm.
for knowledge, for gnosis,
Yes,
I
your
think,
channel is definitely a deep well, and I highly recommend it
of
to
course,
all of those
thank you.
seekers, especially anyone who has any grasp or desire to learn like ceremonial magic, or they're erotically
Mm,
attracted to especially
hmm
these modern practices of like Levy and Crowley, Dion Fortune, all of these people who talk about, working with the gods, working with the planets. really it all goes back to these ancient texts, these core
Yeah.
texts, and no other channel does it better than you. Your revivification of theurgy on your channel is absolutely stupendous. And it's
Oh my
helped me
goodness.
immensely. It's
So,
helped me immensely.
well, thank you. Such praise. Thank you. Such beautiful words. I really appreciate it, Richard. Thank you so much. And thank you again for, you know what? I wanted to say this at the beginning. I wanted to thank you for just the opportunity to come on. This is just like American Esoteric had said earlier, this is the first interview, and I think this is a small corner of the internet that we inhabit. And you've done such a great service by, giving a platform for other voices that aren't, mainstream or even on YouTube. And your work is absolutely quality. It's
Oh,
so
thank you.
insightful. It's so deep. Honestly, I think from a practical perspective as well, you can't do any better. You
Thanks so
bridge that
much.
gap very well. So I look forward to, future interactions and future collaborations because you know what? We're small but mighty, and I think, we got quality behind us.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
All right. Thank you so much.
of
Don't
course.
everybody like and subscribe.
All right,
I'll
cheers. Thank you, brother. Thank
see
you.
you on